Good evening, good morning, good night, good day to all of you out there in the big wide world. Document TV International is back with our weekly show, and as usual, I call on my good friend, Mr. Charles Ortel. How are you, sir?
I'm surviving. I haven't been mugged recently.
That's very good to hear. I hope you stay safe until you come here to Norway next time. Which won't be that long. Anyway, we have a lot to cover. It's been a very active week, and let me start with, what should I call it? One of your favorites. To my astonishment, I read in document.no today that Pope, the old man in Rome, St. Peter's vicar on the God's throne, according to Catholic belief, gave a speech to the Clinton initiative. What do you say?
Well, I mean, it's really remarkable. Without going into the Pope's background, and there are many controversies surrounding this Pope, somebody evidently did no diligence at all on the Clinton Global Initiative or the Clinton Foundation. The Bill, Hillary, Chelsea Clinton Foundation, as I have documented and we've discussed forever, does not lawfully exist. It doesn't have articles of incorporation or bylaws. It hasn't registered properly to do what it just did in New York. But because New York is a Democrat-controlled city and nobody has the stomach to go after the Clintons in New York City and state, they just get away with what is transparent charity fraud and grift. I mean, here we have a team, as Zero had just pointed out, that, and I agree, has destroyed Haiti, has probably overseen the disappearance of about $10 billion in aid that went towards Haiti. That same team now has the Pope's blessing to get, for starters, maybe $25 billion from the World Bank to try to rebuild a country that the Clintons and others have been destroying ever since 1992. I mean, this is ridiculous that the Pope would agree to have any part of it. And even worse when you consider that in 2006, a fake representative of the Catholic Church was honored, a young kid, at the 2006 Clinton Global Initiative for his selfless philanthropy, only to be arrested at the meeting and put in prison for being a Ponzi scheme artist.
I know that the U.S. have a lot of legal loopholes, and there's, justice has a hard time to win in the U.S. due to your legal systems. Nevertheless, I know from ex-Twitter, from you and from others, that there is a growing interest, as you mentioned, Zero Hedge, in the West for having a closer look at what these grifters are doing. But still, it's a lot less than we both would have wanted, isn't it? And then I find it remarkable that Russia Today published an interview with, or an article on the Clinton Initiative, largely built on information that you and your friends had brought up. What does that say about, or what does it tell us most about the West or the Clintons?
Well, I'm standing here in a place where I moved, near to a place where I moved when I was 3 years old. And I remember going to school the next year and being surprised that every day we'd go and we'd do an air raid drill, walking down into the basement as if that would help you in the event of nuclear war. And growing up, if you had told me that the press, investigative journalists in the former Soviet Union would come closer to getting to the truth than the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, I would have told you that you're stark raving mad. But that is exactly the case now. Fiction is sold as fact by the corporate-owned media around the world. And the biggest problem we have with the American justice system is not whether there should be another law. It's prosecutors like the special counsel going after Trump have way too much discretion that can be easily abused. They can go after people on cases that are not hard at all. They can invent a rationale for torturing somebody who's trying to run for office, or they can look at the record and say, you know what, there's not a shred of evidence here that there's any wrongdoing, and decide on their own not to prosecute or to let the statute of limitations run. This is very dangerous, I think, for anybody who believes, like as I do, that America needs to attract foreign capital, because we do. We have too much debt, and we see in countries what happens when you are wasteful in government spending and when you burn money and put on too much debt, your currency crashes. And when that happens, or before that happens, you need to attract foreign capital. By these abuses, we are weakening the argument that anybody should put money inside our country, and that's very dangerous.
It is indeed very dangerous. And before we leave the Pope, he gave an audience to Bill Clinton, the incarnate sinner, former occupant of the White House, this summer. And he also found time to meet the son of George Soros. We haven't talked that much about his son is named Alex Soros. And we have this old adage saying, tell me who you see and I'll tell you who you are. So it looks like the Pope really has gotten himself into some bad company. Speaking about bad company, Zelensky is in New York this week because it's a high-level meet, and I just read that he had a proposal to the UN General Assembly. He wanted to kick Russia out of the Security Council and replace it with, you guess who? Scholz and Germany. Yeah. Germany.
Well, yeah. So the UN, we have to remember, and people who don't know the history will forget that I think Woodrow Wilson was a big proponent of the President of the United States in the 1900s, a man who did a lot of damage to U.S. standing and world peace, and is a despicable human being if you look into his history. Woodrow Wilson proposed that the United States get actively involved with the League of Nations. We wouldn't do it. The League of Nations failed. And so people decided to create the UN. The UN defines deviancy downwards. It is a destructive, morally challenged, wasteful operation that has really compounded problems around the world. These people need to stop talking about public-private partnerships. The Secretary General needs to forget about getting $100 billion for anything, let alone by way of a global tax. And we need to learn from our mistakes. And the UN is one glaring open wound of festering demagogues. So the fact that Zelensky, at this stage, where the arguments to continue to support what I would argue is a reprehensible regime now that is expunging freedom inside Ukraine for anybody who opposes him, this man is now taking meetings with hedge fund titans and private equity investors under a misguided theory that people here in New York are going to want to give any more money to Zelensky and his band of thugs. So, I mean, I think it's very bad timing for Zelensky. It's very bad timing for the Clinton Global Initiative. People are sick of their grift, and they're sick of Team Clinton. And when we talk about we need a new generation of leadership around the world, that certainly applies to the Clinton family and does not argue for Chelsea Clinton.
I couldn't agree more, Charles. I just have to say, as a Norwegian, I don't need to remind you, I know that. But I think most people, most of our viewers might have forgotten who the big powers found to be the first Secretary General of the United Nations.
Wasn't it an American?
No. It was a Norwegian Social Democrat, Trygve Lie.
Oh, there you go.
From Grorud, north in Oslo. A Labour Party no-good bureaucrat and politician who was elevated to the then highest level and play matchmaker in not the League of Nations, but in the United Nations. That was a bad start, and I think it's only grown worse since. We'll leave the UN aside for a second, but we will get back to it indirectly through other ways. First, Zelensky. Zelensky is begging or is talking to hedge fund managers in New York on his U.S. visit. Well, maybe he ought to go back to Ukraine. Maybe he ought to visit Warsaw and visit the Poles and ask them if they could please give him more arms. Because the Polish government has said, enough of this. We're being inundated with your products. And we've helped you with arms, with volunteers, housing your refugees. Now you want to have the male refugees back so you can send them to the front line. But then on top of that, you destroy our agricultural sector. You have no gratefulness. Okay, no more arms from Poland to Ukraine. Now, this is a significant move by a NATO member who's definitely not pro-Russian.
Right. Well, I think what we're watching here, once again, China wins. I mean, the NATO project, I think, is over. The idea that NATO's mission is going to be to meddle around the world in different conflicts where we seem to do a very good job at failing, that's ridiculous. And I think Americans, and by next year, if we have a fair election, Americans are going to send a resounding message around the world that we are peace-loving, not conflict stirrers, nation builders. We want peace along our borders. We want peace with our neighbors. We're tired of these wars, with the endless wars that feed the defense contractors and the foundations and the deep state. Enough of this stuff. It's not working. And I think by Poland's action here, NATO is supposed to work together. Poland's saying, "Screw NATO. We're not going to do what NATO said we're going to do." And they're not the only country, I think, that's going to rebel against NATO and U.S. and U.K. leadership. So that, I think, is we're hurtling towards a point now where the EU is going to lose relevance. The EU will now not be the biggest market in the world. So China will be, and India will be. And so all of this mayhem helps China at a time that China is itself in deep trouble, with too much debt and a lot of corruption and broken projects around the world as they try to amp up and be more aggressive. So this is just pure mayhem, and Zelensky is a deluded fool, in my view. He was an actor. He should have never been put in this position. People should be ashamed of themselves for supporting this regime of corrupt thugs.
And yesterday, back to the UN General Assembly, one who phrased more or less your words in the UN General Assembly yesterday was Serbia's president, Mr. Vučić, who said I haven't seen the speech in its entirety, but he berated the West and he said, "You guys are so hypocritical. You took a part of the integral territory of Serbia, of former Yugoslavia, and turned it into a nation state. But you will not admit that the Russians in Lugansk and Donetsk have the same right to autonomy. You've been denying them for 8-9 years and more. Now you got war. And believe me," he said, "we will fight for our territorial integral rights as well. So we will never surrender." And this is a language, it's the strongest language I've heard by a state leader in the UN or read about in a long, long time. And in our media, in the Norwegian media, it's not even mentioned. I mean, it's so one-sided. I mean, and if you're one-sided and you're deaf and half-blind, and then on top of that are being force-fed baloney or malarkey, as you like to call it, for years, you're not going to believe your own eyes. And Charles, Yeah, please, if you have something to add on Kosovo, Serbia.
Sure. Sure. Well, I mean, there's a great song and video called "It Wasn't Me." It's by this singer Shaggy. And without getting into the lyrics, because they're a little bit, they're not G-rated. It's basically an implausible denial of the obvious, and that's what we have here. These people who rush from catered party to fancy hotel suite to conference to award ceremony, giving virtue signaling speeches, saying they're rushing ahead to protect the vulnerable, whatever. These people are full of the brown stuff. And I think the people who pay the taxes, the people who are fearful of what inflation is going to do to them and is doing to them and their prospects, these people are coming out of the woodwork. In the main, in the U.S., these are people who do not vote. But I think they're going to vote in 2024. They're sick of this, watching, our own cities are falling apart. We have no borders. We have raging inflation, despite the fact that that idiot who's the Treasury Secretary says inflation is transitory. And probably doesn't even know what transitory means. So we have a very unstable situation, which benefits those who would like to move towards a globalist, intolerant surveillance state, Klaus Schwab and others. That's not a place that the heartland in America is ever going to support. So that project is dead on arrival, though they may try very hard to push it. And you're right about Serbia and the double standards. That's a deep and thorny set of issues. It goes back centuries. And those type of issues are not ones where a nation state such as America, created in technically in 89 under our Constitution, I don't think we've covered ourselves with enough glory, nor have we done enough good works here inside our own country to help our citizens, to think that we have the bandwidth and the mind share to go around the world meddling in open wound conflicts.
Speaking about, I mean, history has so much to teach us, doesn't it? I mean, I know you love history, and you know a lot more history than I do, but history shows itself time upon time. Speaking about Kosovo, right. Serbia, speaking about Ukraine, Donetsk, Lugansk, Lviv, Ukraine, Poland, Russia. These battlefields are centuries old. And to even think that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, could fix Ukraine and could fix and dismount Russia is unbelievable, really. Now, I want to go to another hotspot, which has been in the news lately, Nagorno-Karabakh. There you have historical not okay, don't you? We have, going back centuries.
Right.
Russia.
No, this is it. Yeah, go ahead.
No.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Please.
So this is yet another example of, a part of the world. I remember reading about this for the first time in the Wall Street Journal decades ago, people predicting that ultimately this could be a flashpoint that could trigger World War III. And we remember that World War I kind of happened, spiraled out of control by accident. We have a lot of people here in big positions of power, starting with the people around Biden. Biden doesn't know what he's doing, but the people who are pulling Biden's strings may know what they're doing. And so far, we've been lucky that we haven't gone into an exchange of nuclear weapons or into an enormously bloodthirsty battle. But people need to remember the estimates I was hearing yesterday of dead in Ukraine, dead Ukrainian soldiers, conscripts. People are saying that that number could be as high as 400,000 people already. To put that number in perspective, in our bloody Vietnam conflict, there were 58,000 dead, and our country back then was about 150, 160 million people, as contrasted to Ukraine, which is down from 44 to 36 million. So to lose 400,000 people already, and on a basis that was sold to the world that don't worry, it's the Ukrainians are going to die, they're going to do the fighting, so you shouldn't care about the danger. That is just morally reprehensible thinking. If you're going to push a nation to lose human life, you better have a clear objective. It better be very important to do it. We don't have that. We have a crazy plan, non-plan, and to think that the team that brought us into Ukraine, the team that fled out of Afghanistan so shamefully that they're now begging the Taliban to stop torturing people, that team would want to rush us into the region you described. It's just something we shouldn't be discussing. It'd be as if you had a prize car collection and you're a 13-year-old like to go use crack cocaine and drive it into other people's houses and wants another car to burn up. I mean, this is not something this team should be allowed to get anywhere near.
I don't know if the U.S. has tried to meddle or to shift winds in the Nagorno-Karabakh Azerbaijani Armenian issue. But it was back in Beirut in the 80s. I met my first Armenian. He had a print shop, and he gave me the first lecture on Armenia and their destiny, their tragedies, the genocide in the beginning of the first century, perpetrated by ostensibly members of the Ottoman army, and there were a lot of other people, but it was undoubtedly a genocide. Then Armenia came under the umbrella of the Soviet Union, as did Azerbaijan. Now, they both gradually gained independence as separate autonomous republics in the Caucasus region. Azerbaijan is bordering on Iran, and Iran is a Shiite country, and so is Azerbaijan largely. There's a lot of Azeris. There's a huge Azeri minority in Iran. Now, we have the paradox here that Iran is supporting the Christians in Astrakh, as the Armenians called Nagorno-Karabakh, and Armenia, against, guess who? Turkey, Pakistan, and Israel. Israel is the largest, and has been for the last 10 years, the largest supplier of arms to Azerbaijan. Now, this is geopolitics for advanced class. Of course, Israel and Turkey see eye to eye and agree on the necessity to curb Iran's influence. They don't want Iranian hegemony in the region. Understandable. And that's also, but I think Iran is likewise not too happy with having Turkey as a big brother in the region. That's why they're supporting the Christian Armenians. Now, the regime in Tehran, last weekend, it was the annual day of memory for Jinnah Mahsa Amini, the Iranian Kurdish girl who was tortured to death by the representatives of the Iranian regime, of an oppressed minority in what was formerly known as West Azeristan, because the first Kurdish republic ever was founded in that very territory in 1948 with the support of the Soviet Union at that time. It was short-lived, and it was just a blur in history, but it shows to enlighten people about the deep historical roots that are transgressing the modern state borders that we think that we have. But these borders are fictitious in reality.
Oh.
And then, speaking about the regime in Tehran, they received a hefty sum of money from you guys this week, didn't they?
by executive order. And they promptly took, once they got the money, they promptly said, forget about the weapons inspectors, and took another hostage. I mean,
Exactly.
this is not just a minor screw up. I mean, this is Bob Gates, our former Secretary of Defense under the first one under Obama, in his book pointed out that Joe Biden has been wrong on every major national security issue in his career. I mean, this person, I mean, when Donald Trump had trouble in new leather shoes, walking down an incline at West Point as he was giving his speech, the mainstream press over here went on and on, invoked the 25th Amendment, invoked the 20. He can't walk. I mean, Joe Biden can't talk, can't think, can't make proper decisions, is not being honest about the corruption involving his family. And the mainstream press is not a shred of evidence to say there's a problem. I mean, this is the mainstream press in this country and in the West is a disgrace. The corporate-owned mainstream press, it may not be fixable, in my opinion.
Have you ever noticed that mainstream media isn't doing their job? Media's job used to be to protect the people from shady government and corporation behaviors and keeping them in check. But the mainstream media are now protecting them against you. Document News is 100% free and independent media house funded by the people, working for the people. We'd like to continue our job informing you about what's really going on, so you're not left with media who tells you what to think instead of giving you information to think about. Support us and thus support yourselves and your loved ones. Thank you.
Speaking about walking, and speaking about the UN General Assembly, which attracts a lot of heads of state every year, Grandpa, the present occupant of the White House, met the president of Brazil, Inácio Lula, yesterday. That didn't go off too well either, did it?
It didn't. I mean, evidently, maybe Biden was scared because, as you may know, Lula, after his first term as president of Brazil, went to prison. And maybe Biden is smart enough to understand that could happen to him. And that's why he wanted to get as far away from Lula as possible.
So that's why he ran off stage and ran into a meeting with another guy who's threatened with prison, Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who had long and frank conversations. This is serious, guys. Now, I'm in no doubt that Benjamin Netanyahu is a seasoned liar and a seasoned statesman, for that matter. So he could
You're
say
repeating yourself.
He said I had a long and frank discussion with President Biden about the possibility of reaching an agreement with Saudi Arabia. Hey. We who have watched, at least try to keep an eye on the Middle East for some years, have known that this is in the coming. I mean, it's a matter of time. It has been a matter of time. And it coincided. I don't envy Netanyahu sitting down with Biden for an hour, or I don't know how long they sat together. But it is definitely something is moving, something big is moving. And yesterday, or this week at least, the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, popularly known as MBS, gave an interview to Fox News. I have to admit, I haven't had time to see the interview, but I've read a little bit about it. And in the interview, according to media reports that I trust, he spoke about the possibility of reaching an agreement with Israel, provided so and so and so. Provided what? Mohammed bin Salman, is no stupid guy. He wants guarantees from the U.S. that he and Saudi Arabia will have access to nuclear technology, just as Iran across the Gulf, the Arab Gulf or the Persian Gulf, depending on which side of the Gulf you're standing, have. He wants to be treated on par with his Shia cousins across the Gulf. And that's realpolitik. And he knows how to play his cards, even though he's playing with Benjamin Netanyahu, who has technology and money. Well, money, the Saudis have enough of money, but they have technology to help the Saudis achieve that because the power of balance is better maintained that way.
Right. Well, I think that MBS is an interesting character. I believe I met him several decades ago because his older brother, who died, was an investor in a firm that I created, and was a nice guy. Sadly, he died in his early 50s. So MBS, if you think about him, he's already fabulously wealthy and powerful. And he, I think, showed in that interview that he's a thoughtful guy. It's not a simple thing to run that country filled with feuding princelings and decades-old grievances, as well as a lot of foreign people, as well as a large Shia population inside the borders in the oil-bearing regions of Saudi Arabia. So it's not a low degree of difficulty job that he's going to find himself filling as he becomes formally the king of Saudi Arabia. And you have to look at him and say, he could be king for another 40 years. So this is somebody who was already powerful, already consequential, and I believe the Biden administration managed to, as the English say, cheese him off right away. So we have some fence mending to do in Saudi Arabia. Netanyahu's position as prime minister is perilous. One day he could be, kicked out if coalitions change. And that's another area the United States policy is not necessarily platinum at this point. You could say it's lead in our ability to attempt to manage affairs in the Middle East.
But Biden or Netanyahu, he has the Palestinian problem. But even the Palestinian problem is minimalized, I would say, when it comes to realpolitics. I mean, if Saudi Arabia could get the nuclear technology they so desperately want, I won't say a word about whether they need it or not, but they would need to be on par with their Shiite cousins, because they don't want to end up like their cousins of several denominations in Syria. Syria is in shambles. Lebanon, who used to be a fairly peaceful microcosmos of the Middle East, once in the early 70s it was labeled Zurich of the Levant, Zurich of the Middle East. I've been there. I love that country. I served there for 2 years. And I still love the people. But I used Robert Fisk's words, the longtime Middle East correspondent, known to be a bit thirsty. I think it was Irish at heart. He wrote a fantastic book called Pity the Nation, about Lebanon and about the conflict. Now, Lebanon is in shambles. Syria is falling apart day by day. The latest is that the Druze of the southwestern province of Suwaida, bordering on the Golan Heights, bordering on Jordan and Lebanon, has risen against the Damascus regime. The Druze have been rather silent all through these 12 years that the uprising has been going on and the war in Syria has been going on. It's a pity. Right. So I pity that nation too.
Well, I mean, and you haven't brought up Libya. I mean, we have open slave markets in Libya. We have a despicable record in that country. And what message does our treatment of Gaddafi tell the rest of the world about how other leaders might be treated, who in theory at the time were saying, Gaddafi was saying that he wanted to smoke a peace pipe and rejoin the civilized company of nations, and look what we did to him. And Hillary Clinton gloated about it. You know, I mean, this is, whether it's Libya, Syria, now Lebanon, I mean, around Afghanistan, Iraq. I mean, how many second chances should we get at this point? I think a sane person thinking about who ought to be at the table solving intractable problems would say not the United States.
Exactly. Hillary Clinton's record is dismal. Together with Sarkozy and then Norwegian Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg, with his right-hand man, the current Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre, they screwed Libya. They screwed the UN too, and they went to war. Right. And now, and let's go back to where we started, not to the Clinton initiative, God forbid, but we'll go back to the city where you're currently residing, Charles, New York, seat of the UN, United Nations. And I guess you hear more sirens than ever these days when all the big shots are whizzing back and forth to their hotels and to their meetings, side meetings, whether it's in BRICS or BRICS countries or NGO soirees, fundraising dinners, etc., etc. You know, the main topic, according to Norway and Norwegian media, according to the EU and the EU media, it is the ESG, it's net zero, it's a looming climate disaster, which the Pope also spoke about.
Right, and because the Pope is, and these are people who in the main, given a choice in our high school before college of taking a math class or a science class, instead studied knitting. I mean, these are people who have no clue about how to examine the issues of our complex atmosphere, the effect of the fact that our planet is 70% covered in water, that there are very powerful forces affecting this planet and Mars, for example. Why are the polar ice caps melting on Mars? Is that because of man-made global warming? I mean, so the notion that you're going to articulate a need, as Gutierrez, the Secretary General, did, for $100 billion in the form of a global tax, because, yeah, giving money into the UN has worked so well. You can look at the Global Fund that's administered by WHO. Credible inside people who were given the task of figuring out how much money was missing concluded years ago that 75% of the money, a minimum of 75% of the money sent to the Global Fund, has been stolen. The last place anybody should be sending money is to the UN, whether for $100 billion climate tax or for some gigantic carbon neutral plan. These people are just not qualified to examine the problems, let alone to fashion solutions, and they need to be repudiated, in some cases imprisoned.
Totally agree again. And meanwhile, while these knitters, wokeheads, Guterres, Ursula von der Leyen, Jonas Gahr Støre, Espen Barth Eide, the former director of World Economic Forum in Davos, are talking and talking and talking, they're not doing the walking. The walking are done by migrants crossing the Mexican-US border, crossing the Mediterranean. Lampedusa was invaded. 10,000 poor African, 85 or 87% young, able-bodied African males came in rickety boats to Lampedusa, the Italian outpost close to Tunisia, or closer to Tunisia, over the weekend. And Lampedusa has a population, native population of 6,300. And France doesn't want to take any refugees from Lampedusa. Germany don't want to take any refugees from Lampedusa. I'm sure Poland don't want to take them. Maybe Ukraine. I don't know.
Maybe New York. New York. Send them to New York.
Yeah. No, I tell you what, I'll take MBS any day rather than Ursula von der Leyen. It's time for...
Yeah. What we should do, Geir, is these world leaders who want open borders. I think the passionate the people who are shouting loudest for that should wake up tomorrow and discover that next to Joe Biden's beach house is a falling down hotel filled with recent arrivals who are going to be doing whatever they do by way of mayhem right next to his mansion. And the same in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., to these senators, these congresspeople, and the governors around the country. This is, I can see it with my own eyes. Jason Goodman and I walk around the city twice a week when it's not raining on video, and you just see the mayhem for yourself. You see people who are obviously not here legally. We've been to the centers where they claim their houses are filthy, and you're bringing people in at a time where our citizens are struggling to keep good paying jobs. You're creating all these new people who could potentially be in the employment pool. And that's before you start thinking about the harm that happens to the children, boys and girls who are moved across our open border, the horrors that people are reporting now of trafficking, of organ harvesting, of all kinds of disgusting activities that are being enabled, frankly, encouraged by irresponsible morons who are mayors of New York, mayors of Chicago, mayors of Los Angeles, mayor of Boston, governors of these states, people in Washington, D.C. Enough.
Politicians in Norway, NGO leaders of Norway, of Denmark, of Sweden, all over Europe, you've had leaders like the ones you mentioned just now. I don't know if you knew that, but this week on Thursday, it's 10 years ago since the Westgate terror, terror inferno. But it was horrendous. But I'm not sure, that you know that amongst those mainly Somali perpetrators, terrorists, there were 2 Norwegians. Did you know that?
Wow. I didn't.
No, you didn't. One of them, Hassan Duhulo, lived in a peaceful small town called Larvik for some years before he joined his compadres and went on a killing spree at one of the largest shopping malls in Nairobi. Now, alongside of him, he was killed. Alongside him was one Ikrahima al-Musairi, I think. I'm not sure of his name, but he managed to get away alive. He's still at large. The U.S. then issued a reward of $17 million on his head for his partaking in this terror atrocity. But as far as I know, he's still out there. Maybe he'll come to a theater next to you one day. I mean, your borders are as open. I know, me neither. But the borders are open thanks to our woke politicians. So it's time to woke down and wake up, right?
I agree.
Finally, I got you to go woke, go broke.
Stay broke.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Stay broke.
We, thank to God, we're not entirely broke, but we're not rich either. That's why we're standing here and trying to give you folks out there some sound information that you won't get anywhere else. Charles is doing it twice a week with Jason Goodman. You can find them on Crowdsource the Truth. You'll find Document TV International and other international stories on document.news. You can support both of us. We'll leave the how to the lead text. For Document, you could use PayPal at document.no. I hope you had a good time, and I hope you all tune in next week, because I want to have you back next week, Charles. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you.